Chances are, if you're a fan of Unsung Heroes, as I know many of you guys are, you probably did a bit of a double take as far as this episode goes, both in terms of the title and probably initially the thumbnail as well. Because for one thing, how is the Nissan Serena an unsung hero? And then secondly, the title doesn't say Unsung Hero, it says Unsung Villains. So what's this all about? Well, this is actually based on a suggestion for a series, actually, but I decided to implement it as more of a novelty kind of episode within Unsung Heroes, because in a similar way to the Dark series that I did for Gran Turismo 6, there aren't really enough cars for me to actually trash out there, because at the end of the day, jokes and satirization aside, every car that gets you from A to B is accomplishing its role. So to say that something is a bad car is a fairly unrealistic term. It's more just a case of personal preference. However, if we are going to do some novelty episodes, what a better place to start than with this? The mighty Nissan Serena, a vehicle so expertly engineered that you would never believe it could come from the same company that made something as iconic as the Nissan GTR. Because what Nissan did for the Serena is actually quite remarkable. They took about 40 to 50 years of motorsport history, from the GTR, from later on the Silvia, in the drift world even, with privateer teams building up those vehicles and using them as forces to be reckoned with, building stuff like the Stager, which took Skyline technology and put it into a more practical package, various other vehicles too that developed this wealth of high performance cars, and then they did nothing with it at all. They decided to make this car, which somehow manages to have a turbo engine, a mid-engine all-wheel drive layout no less. It's kind of the Lamborghini Gallardo of people carriers, and they managed to make it accelerate from 0 to 60 slower than an Amoeba. Now that is not an easy thing to do, but somehow Nissan managed to do it. And I feel qualified to talk about this car in particular because my family used to own one, and I can say that the car was perfectly acceptable. It was spacious, it had 8 seats, 5 doors, because for some reason Nissan only thought you needed a sliding door on one side, because of course, flip onto the left-hand side of the car and the kids are screwed. They're not going to get out. They're going to burn to death, because again, brilliant engineering is what Nissan does best. Now, the fact that this car is pretty much the slowest accelerating thing ever in England, apart from the country itself moving through the water, if that were even possible, it's a feat. It really is. Nissan managed to outdo themselves for sure when it comes to the Serena. In terms of visual design, it's one of the most stunningly atrocious things out there. It looks like a shoebox, which sometimes can work. The Hummer is extremely square, Volvos are very square, Saabs are very square, but there's a certain charm to having a square vehicle. The Serena has the charm of a cinder block. And that's kind of an insult to a cinder block, because at least that accomplishes a goal. This is basically just a van with a bunch of seats put in the back. And although minivan tends to be a term that's thrown about a lot when it comes to vehicles like this, it's usually in jest. They're not really minivans. They are purpose-built people movers with all the kinds of tech and accoutrement which people, such as families, would want for their kids on a long journey to keep them occupied. I mean, I don't know what the kids in the back of a Serena are supposed to do to keep them occupied on a long journey beyond setting fire to the plastic seats or playing with the threading that could probably cut your eyes out because it's so sharp. But the vehicle is clearly not designed with a huge amount of thought behind it. I've never looked into the actual performance specs of a Serena or stuff like the safety tech. What a laughable concept, it probably has none. But I have no doubt that it would be as spectacularly disappointing as everything else on the car. It's a piece of trash, and it's a wonder that Nissan ever produced the vehicle at all. Now, one of the greatest things about the vehicle that we had was that we realised one day that it seemed to have a bit of trouble driving uphill, especially for a vehicle with a turbo. We then removed the cover to take a look at what might be going on underneath, and there was no turbo. Well, that explains what the problem was. I'm not sure if that was a factory option to have the non-turbo Serena, but it wouldn't surprise me. You probably have to pay more to not have the turbo, kind of like Mercedes offering a glove box as an optional extra. So as far as vehicles go, the Serena is a pretty abysmal one. And when it comes to carting families around, you would probably be better off getting a bus ticket, maybe a taxi, because at least in a taxi you can claim, well, it's not my car, I'm just getting a lift. And in a bus, it doesn't have any kind of pretension to be anything other than just a big box that moves people around. With this, it's a Nissan. I mean, they have a brand to uphold, and somehow they completely forgot that they were doing that when it came to this, because I don't know what marketing team, if anyone, was behind this car, but whoever it was, I hope is not working at Nissan anymore, because since then, we haven't really seen anything else like this from them, thankfully. It's the kind of car which makes a Pontiac Aztek look pretty interesting visually, makes it look like a work of art, in fact, in comparison, and in terms of performance, as I said, from experience, I can say I have never before or since sat in or experienced the G-forces quite like this. In fact, the G-forces were so remarkable that I felt like I could probably walk quicker to the destination. And as far as vehicles that we talk about in this series typically go, they tend to have rivals, sometimes direct rivals, sometimes rivalries that last decades in the motorsport world or in the production world, or going back and forth with world records such as between Bugatti and Koenigsegg, or the rally legends from Mitsubishi and Subaru, or the motorsport rivalries of Porsche and pretty much everyone else, or Corvettes and Vipers. The Nissan Serena is in this remarkable position that I've never really seen from any other car, wherein its nearest natural rival is castration, because that's pretty much the only thing that's a worthwhile option instead of needing to have a car like this for as many kids as you chose to have. But all in all, of course, all of this is in jest. It still does the job. I actually found it to be quite a well-designed car in terms of the interior. Not that it was pretty or overly well-equipped, but for its age, it did the job. And it was actually quite a nice place to be in the back. So, of course, I always have to temper my attacks on cars or companies by saying that, at the end of the day, it's a car that does a job. But it is still an interesting idea to have these kind of anti-episodes of the series, so for those of you guys who would be interested in this kind of thing coming back, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and if nothing else, it's just a fun little experimental episode. But that's it for this installment. If you'd like to hear some actual serious episodes of this series, then click through at the end, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.